The phone rang just after midnight, the kind of call that makes your heart drop before you even answer. I remember staring at the screen, confused by the international number, my mind racing through a dozen possibilities, none of them good. When I finally picked up, a stranger's voice told me my 18-year-old daughter, Ella, had been hit by a drunk driver overseas. She was in a coma. Stable, they said, but critical. I didn't pack properly. I didn't think clearly. I just grabbed my passport, locked the door behind me, and boarded the first available flight. Everything else, my job, my house, my worries, faded into nothing compared to the image of my daughter lying unconscious in a hospital bed. For weeks, my life became a blur of antiseptic smells, beeping monitors, and whispered prayers. I slept in a stiff plastic chair beside Ella's bed, waking up every time her heart monitor shifted tone. Doctor spoke carefully, never promising anything, never ruling anything out. Every day felt like walking on glass. What I didn't know, what never even crossed my mind, was that while I was thousands of miles away fighting for my daughter's life, someone else was watching my empty house. That someone was my sister, Sarah. Sarah had always been different. That's the polite way to put it. Diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder years earlier, she floated through life leaving chaos in her wake and somehow never taking responsibility for it. She knew I was gone, and instead of worry or concern, she saw opportunity. While I sat holding my daughter's hand, Sarah and her boyfriend, Jake, an ex-con with a long rap sheet, broke into my home through the back door. They didn't rush. They didn't panic. They took their time, tearing through drawers, closets, and cabinets like professionals. Jewelry passed down from my grandmother, gone. My $2,000 camera I used for freelance photography, gone. Cash I'd been saving for medical expenses, gone. And then, just to prove there were no limits to their cruelty, they emptied Ella's childhood piggy bank. Coins she'd collected since she was 5. Money she planned to use for something special someday. When I finally flew back home with Ella weeks later, her condition still uncertain, I noticed it immediately. The house felt wrong. Too quiet. Too empty. Drawers were open. Closets looked disturbed. The longer I walked through the house, the worse it became. By the time I reached Ella's room and saw her piggy bank shattered and empty, I collapsed on the floor and sobbed. I was already drowning financially from medical bills. This felt like a final blow meant to finish me off. I checked the security cameras. Pray it was a stranger, anyone but who I already suspected. But there she was on the screen. Sarah, smiling, comfortable, acting like she belonged there. I called the police immediately. As I waited for them to arrive, old memories surfaced, ones I'd spent years trying to forget. Sarah had always been like this. Charming when it suited her, ruthless when it didn't. When we were kids, she once convinced me to let her play with fireworks our parents had hidden in the garage. I knew it was wrong. I told her no. She smiled, promised it would be fine, and I gave in. Minutes later, the garage exploded in smoke and noise. When our parents rushed home, terrified, Sarah cried and said it was all my idea, that I forced her. She was so convincing that they believed her. I was grounded for a month. She got a warning. That was Sarah. And now, decades later, she hadn't changed at all. The police took my statement and promised to investigate. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Because Sarah never just did one bad thing. She always escalated. I thought calling the police would end it. But the very next day, Sarah showed up at my door crying, apologizing, and setting the stage for something far worse than I could have ever imagined. Sarah showed up at my door the very next day. I hadn't slept. Between Ella's fragile condition and the shock of the break-in, my nerves were shot. When I opened the door and saw my sister standing there, eyes red, shoulders slumped, hands trembling like she might collapse, my first instinct wasn't anger. It was exhaustion. She threw herself into my arms and started crying before I could even speak. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she said between sobs. I swear, I wasn't thinking. I just needed money. We're family, please don't hate me. It was a performance I'd seen countless times growing up. Tears on demand. Words carefully chosen. Promises she never intended to keep. And yet, Standing there in my doorway, emotionally drained and desperate for peace, I wanted to believe her. She blamed Jake, said he pressured her, said she felt guilty the moment she stepped inside my house. She swore she'd return what she could, swore she'd never hurt me again. I should have slammed the door in her face. Instead, I listened. When the police followed up later that day, I did something I would regret for years. I refused to press charges against Sarah. I told myself forgiveness might finally teach her something, that sparing her consequences might break the cycle we've been trapped in since childhood. Jake, however, didn't get the same mercy. The police tracked him down within days. He had outstanding warrants, unpaid violations, and a history that made the case against him airtight. With security footage and stolen items recovered from his place, the trial barely lasted. Jake was sentenced to prison, no question about it. I told myself it was over. I told myself Sarah would finally understand how close she'd come to losing everything, and how lucky she was that I protected her. I was wrong. Instead of gratitude, Sarah's forgiveness curdled into resentment. She blamed me for Jake's arrest. In her mind, I was the villain, the traitor, the reason her life had fallen apart. The retaliation started small. Fake social media accounts popped up, posting vague accusations about me being a terrible mother and not who people think. I ignored them, assuming they'd burn out. They didn't. One morning, I stepped outside to grab the newspaper and noticed my neighbors staring. One woman across the street turned away the second our eyes met. Another whispered something and shut her door. Later that afternoon, a neighbor I trusted called me quietly. His voice was uneasy. "I think you should know," he said. "Your sister has been talking to people. She's telling them you neglected your daughter, that she had to help while you went off with other men." I felt physically sick. Everyone knew Ella had been hospitalized overseas. I thought they knew I was there with her. But Sarah had twisted the story, painted herself as a hero and me as a monster. And people believed her, at least enough to doubt me. Days later, I found my car vandalized. All 4 tires slashed. Deep scratches carved into the paint. Words I won't repeat etched into doors. I stood there staring, heart pounding, hands shaking, knowing exactly who did it, and knowing I couldn't prove it. Then the note started. The first one was taped to my front door. "You'll regret this." The second appeared 2 nights later. "You can't hide." Each message grew darker, more personal, referencing things only Sarah would know. I stopped sleeping. Every creak in the house sounded like footsteps. Every shadow felt like a threat. I changed the locks, installed security cameras. But fear doesn't disappear just because you prepare for it. It settles in and waits. One evening, I heard a crash outside and rushed to the window. Under the porch light, I saw Sarah. Her face was twisted with rage as she tried to smash my living room window with something heavy. I called the police, hands trembling. But by the time they arrived, she was gone. The officers were sympathetic. They told me to document everything, save messages, keep records. But without concrete evidence, there was little they could do. Sarah knew exactly how far she could push without crossing the line. And then one night, she crossed it completely. I thought harassment and fear were the worst she could do, until the smell of smoke filled my house, and I realized my sister wasn't just trying to scare me anymore. She was trying to end my life. I woke up coughing. At first, my half-asleep brain couldn't understand why my chest felt tight or why the air tasted bitter. Then the smell hit me, thick, acrid smoke. My eyes snapped open, and panic flooded my body in an instant. Something was burning. I jumped out of bed and ran into the hallway, my heart slamming against my ribs. Smoke curled along the ceiling like a living thing, slipping under doors and down the stairs. The house, my home, the place I thought I had secured, was on fire. I screamed Ella's name even though she wasn't there. She was still staying with my best friend while her recovery remained uncertain. Thank God for that decision. If she'd been home, I don't know if either of us would have made it out alive. I rushed downstairs, my bare feet slapping against the floor, following the glow toward the garage. Flames licked up the walls, crackling violently, heat rolling over me like a wave. The fire was spreading fast. Through the haze of smoke and firelight, I saw movement. Sarah. She was running toward her car, moving fast but not panicked, almost excited. I watched her throw herself into the driver's seat and speed away. As she passed under the streetlight, I caught a glimpse of her face through the window. She was smiling, the same grin she'd worn years ago when the fireworks exploded in our parents' garage. That same thrill, that same lack of remorse. Sirens wailed in the distance as neighbors poured out of their houses. I stumbled outside, coughing, shaking, barely able to stand. The fire department arrived just in time, managing to contain the flames before they consumed the entire house. The garage was destroyed, but the rest of the home survived. I gave my statement to the police that night, voice hoarse, hands trembling, and this time I had something I had never had before. Proof. The security cameras caught everything. Sarah pouring accelerant, lighting the fire, running to her car. Clear, undeniable. There was no talking her way out of this. She was arrested within hours. The charges were severe: arson, harassment, vandalism, breaking and entering, and multiple counts related to threats and stalking. The case moved fast. Too fast for Sarah to manipulate, lie, or cry her way through. In court, she didn't look at me. No tears. No apologies. Just cold resentment. The verdict was guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to several years in prison. When the gavel came down, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. Real relief. The kind that lets you breathe again. For the first time in months, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. And yet, relief wasn't the only thing I felt. There was grief, too. This wasn't just some stranger who tried to destroy my life. This was my sister. Someone I'd grown up with. Someone I protected. Someone I'd forgiven when I shouldn't have. A few weeks later, I visited her in jail. I don't know why I went. Closure, maybe, or a desperate need to understand how things had spiraled this far. She sat across from me in the visitation room, smaller than I remembered, her bravado stripped away by concrete walls and orange fabric. For a moment, she looked almost human. She told me she never meant for it to go that far. She said she felt abandoned, overshadowed, angry. She admitted she'd been planning to get back at me long before the break-in. That resentment had been building for years. Her disorder, her inability to empathize, had fueled everything. Tears welled in her eyes. And for a brief second, I wondered this one time, it was real. But then she started asking for favors. Legal help, money, support. And I realized the truth hadn't changed at all. I left the jail with a heavy heart, knowing the sisterly bond I'd hoped for never truly existed. Life slowly began to stabilize after that. I reinforced security, joined a neighborhood watch, sought counseling to process the trauma. Therapy helped me reclaim pieces of myself that fear had stolen. Ella's recovery became my sole focus. She had suffered severe brain damage from a coma. Progress was slow, painfully slow, but her spirit never broke. Every small victory, a word spoken clearly, a steady step, a genuine smile, felt like a miracle. When the day finally came to bring her home, knowing Sarah was behind bars, I cried with gratitude. I thought the worst was behind us. I was wrong again. Just when peace returned and Ella slept safely in her own bed, my phone rang, and the voice on the other end belonged to the last person I ever wanted to hear from. The phone rang while I was helping Ella settle back into her room. She was exhausted but smiling, her eyes drifting shut as I tucked the blankets around her. For the first time in months, my house felt like a home again. Quiet, safe, normal. Then my phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number flashed across the screen. I hesitated, debating whether to ignore it. After everything we'd been through, unknown calls made my stomach knot. But something, instinct maybe, told me to answer. The line crackled with background noise. Voices echoed. Metal doors slammed somewhere in the distance. Is this my name? A man asked. I recognized the voice immediately. Jake. My grip tightened around the phone. A cold chill crawled up my spine. I demanded to know why he was calling, and how he even got my number. I need to warn you, he said quickly. About Sarah. You don't know everything. I laughed, sharp and bitter. She's in prison. I snapped. Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying it. But Jake didn't stop. He claimed Sarah had been planning to destroy my life for years, not just emotionally, but legally. He said the break-in, the harassment, the fire, those were only parts of something bigger. According to him, she'd intend to frame me for crimes once things escalated, to make me look unstable, dangerous, even criminal. I have proof, he said. Messages, plans, conversations. I can testify. There it was. The catch. He wanted help reducing his sentence. A recommendation. Legal assistance. Something in exchange for his help. My mind raced. Part of me wanted to hang up immediately. Another part, one I hated, felt fear creeping back in. What if he was telling the truth? What if Sarah wasn't done, even behind bars? I looked over at Ella, sleeping peacefully, completely unaware of the monsters still circling our lives. The thought of risking her safety made my chest ache. I told Jake his plan wouldn't work. Sarah was already convicted. His leverage was gone. He laughed softly. You really think prison walls stop someone like her? He said. I can make sure you and your daughter are safe forever. That was the moment I knew this conversation was poison. I told him not to call again and hung up, hands shaking. Still, his words lingered. For days, they lived in my head rent-free, replaying late at night when fear had room to breathe. What if there was more? What if I was ignoring a real threat out of pride or exhaustion? I didn't contact Jake again. Instead, I started digging. I reached out to Mark, an old friend who'd helped me quietly during the worst of Sarah's harassment. He had connections. He knew how to look beneath the surface. A few days later, Mark called me back. His voice was grim. Jake, it turned out, had been busy even from behind bars. He'd maintained contact with old associates, manipulating situations, planning narratives, and, most disturbing of all, laying groundwork for a setup. If I had accepted his offer, I would have walked straight into a trap. Mark uncovered transcripts and recorded conversations showing Jake's real plan. Use me as a scapegoat. Frame me for crimes Sarah had discussed, making it look like I was the mastermind behind everything. He hoped that by helping the authorities uncover a bigger conspiracy, he could bargain his way into a lighter sentence. My hands shook as I flipped through the documents Mark gave me. This wasn't about protecting me. It was about saving himself. And Sarah? She wasn't some helpless pawn in his story. Even behind bars, she was still dangerous, still pulling strings, still poisoning lives. I realized in how close I'd come to destroying myself by trusting the wrong person again. I decided not to hide. I decided to confront him. Jake thought he was the one pulling the strings, but I was about to walk into prison with proof that would turn his entire plan against him. Walking into the prison felt surreal. I'd already faced my sister across a metal table. But this was different. Jake wasn't family. He was a predator who believed he was smarter than everyone else in the room. And for a long time, that confidence had worked in his favor. Not anymore. When I sat down across from him, Jake smirked like he already knew how the conversation would end. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, waiting for me to beg or bargain. Instead, I placed a folder on the table. One by one, I slid the documents toward him. Phone transcripts, recorded calls, notes passed through third parties, names of associates, timelines, plans, everything Mark had uncovered. Jake's smirk faded. His eyes darted across the pages, scanning faster, jaw tightening with every line. When he looked back up at me, the confidence was gone, replaced with shock, then anger. You went digging, he said slowly. Yes, I replied, and you underestimated me. I told him I knew about the setup, about the plan to pin future crimes on me, about his attempts to manipulate the narrative from behind bars. I told him the authorities were already aware, and that this meeting was no longer about negotiation. For the first time, Jake looked afraid. He lashed out, accusing me of betrayal, of ruining his chances, of choosing the wrong side. But it was too late. His own words, his own arrogance, had sealed his fate. Within weeks, additional charges were added to his sentence. Attempted coercion, conspiracy, obstruction. The time he thought he could shave off his sentence turned into years added instead. That chapter closed with finality I hadn't felt in a long time. Still, healing didn't happen overnight. Even with both Sarah and Jake incarcerated, the damage they'd done lingered. I double-checked locks. I startled at sudden noises. Sleep came in fragments. Trauma doesn't disappear just because the danger does. I focused on rebuilding. I upgraded the security system, installed motion sensors. Got to know my neighbors again, not through rumors, but through truth. Slowly, trust returned. So did my reputation. Therapy became a lifeline. Through counseling, I learned how deeply betrayal cuts when it comes from family. I learned that forgiveness without boundaries isn't kindness. It's self-destruction. And most importantly, I learned that protecting myself didn't make me heartless. It made me responsible. Ella was my anchor through all of it. Her recovery wasn't linear. Some days were filled with progress and laughter. Others were quiet, frustrating, and painful. But her determination never wavered. She fought for every step forward, every regained memory, every moment of independence. We celebrated the smallest milestones. Her first full sentence without struggling. Her first walk around the block. Her first night sleeping without nightmares. Life slowly found a rhythm again. And just when I thought the storm had finally passed, one last truth surfaced, one that would change how I viewed everything that had happened. I believed the danger was over. But final revelation about Sarah's intentions would prove that surviving wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. The final truth didn't come from a phone call or a confrontation. It arrived quietly, folded into a thick envelope Mark handed me one afternoon as we sat at my kitchen table. Inside were psychological evaluations, court summaries, and internal notes from Sarah's case, documents I hadn't been given before because they weren't necessary for conviction, but they were necessary for understanding. Sarah's actions weren't impulsive. They weren't reactions. They were calculated. Years of resentment, entitlement, and fixation had shaped a long-term plan to dismantle my life piece by piece. The break-in wasn't the beginning. It was simply the first move I noticed. Reading it made my stomach twist, not out of fear, but clarity. This wasn't my fault, not my forgiveness, not my patience, not my attempt to keep family intact. Some people don't want reconciliation. They want control. With Sarah's sentencing finalized and Jake's extended sentence locked in, legal experts confirmed what I hoped but hadn't dared believe. There was no realistic path for either of them to reach me again. No leverage. No backdoor manipulation. No loose ends. For the first time in years, I exhaled fully. Healing didn't happen all at once, but it happened steadily. I sold the house, not because it was damaged beyond repair, but because it held too many echoes. Too many nights spent listening for footsteps that would never come again. Ella and I moved somewhere quieter, closer to nature, where mornings began with sunlight instead of anxiety. Ella thrived. Her recovery continued to surprise doctors. While some damage remained permanent, her resilience filled in the gaps science couldn't explain. She laughed more, slept better, dreamed again. Watching her rebuild herself reminded me that survival isn't just about making it through. It's about choosing to live afterward. We created new traditions. Sunday breakfasts, evening walks, celebrating progress instead of perfection. And slowly, the past loosened its grip. I stopped checking cameras obsessively. Stopped jumping at every unknown number. Stopped waiting for disaster. Through therapy, I learned something that changed everything. Closure doesn't come from understanding why someone hurt you. It comes from accepting that you don't need to understand them to move on. Sarah was sick. Jake was dangerous. Both made their choices. But I made mine too. I chose boundaries. I chose safety. I chose my daughter. I chose peace. Sometimes late at night, I still think about the sister I wished I had. The one who would have stood beside me instead of against me. I've made peace with the fact that she never existed. Mourning that truth was painful, but freeing. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by protection, love, and accountability. Today, our lives are quieter. Not because nothing happens, but because chaos no longer lives here. We've built something steady. Something honest. Something safe. And if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's this. Forgiveness without limits can destroy you. But courage, clarity, and boundaries can save everything that matters. As I watched Ella smile across the table from me one evening, laughing over something small and ordinary, I realized something powerful. We didn't just survive. We won. I thought this was a story about betrayal, but in the end, it became a story about reclaiming control, protecting what matters most, and proving that even after everything is taken from you, your future is still yours to choose.